Okay, so I think every share on Chanukah has to start in a very similar way, but we'll try and take this in a way which is certainly was new to me when I heard this idea for the first time, and I hope it will add something to your Chanukah. So the Gemara starts off famously in Gemara Shabbos, Daf Chaf Aleph, my Chanukah, what is Chanukah, what's it all about, why are we celebrating? The Tanu Rabbanan, B'chafei Kislev, Yom Chanukah, Tamnia, Inun, right, these are 8 days of Chanukah. Right, we don't say Haspedim, we don't fast. Why? Because when the Yavanim went into the Beis Hamikdash, they made all the oil impure. When the Hasmonean kings, when their armies vanquished them, they couldn't find They found one little flask with the seal of the Kohen Gadol, and it could only burn for one night. A miracle happened. From it they burnt it 8 days. The following year, they fixed the days and made them into Yom Tovim with Halal and Hiddur. Now, the truth is, there's a lot packed into this Gemara. But the next thing that you have to do, and kind of obligatory when it comes to Shem Chanukah, is ask the question of the Beis Yosef, which is probably the most famous question ever asked by anyone, and certainly the most answered question ever. And that is, why is Chanukah 8 days? Surely Chanukah should be 7 days. There's no miracle for oil. You find oil that burns for 1 day. Great, it should have burned for 1 day. So then, Chanukah should only be 7 days because the miracle was only 7 days. So there's no exaggeration to say there are hundreds of answers to this question. And I think the question is more of a hechitimtza for the answers, as it were. The question is just a platform for the answers rather than the question itself being something that we should be terribly bothered by. But what I would like to focus on is the approach of the Taz. The Taz says the following thing: 8 days of Chanukah, etc. Why was this? Okay, and there are different answers that are given. Va'al kulam kasha, with all the answers that are given, this is the second line of the Taz. She'ein lanu remez mizeh shenasa kein, ve'im kein hayel rabbeinu lahaski davo zeh kadei sheneda hanes manasa balayla harishon. All the different possibilities of answers that you could give are rather creative and somewhat inventive. And therefore, we need to have something that's perhaps a little bit more straightforward. And the Taz says the following thing. V'li nireh l'taretz. I would like to propose the following solution. D'lemafreya anu royin shegam balayla harishona haya nes. Shematzina b'sefer Hazaya al pasuk. There is a rule when it comes to miracles that miracles don't happen something from nothing. The story with Elisha and the Shunamis, also with Isha and Sarfatis, was it not? That what happens, if you've got a bit of oil, we can kind of keep the Akada Kemach and the whole oil, we're going to keep it going, like the Baba Sali and his Arak. Once you've got something there, the bracha is always a lashon of continuation, of extension. We can keep it going. But miracles that are done don't happen yesh me'ayin. Therefore, you have to have a little bit of oil in order for there to be miraculous oil. If the oil would have been finished, if all the oil on day one, says the Taz, would have been finished, there'd have been no more oil left by the end of 24 hours. If there'd have been no more oil left by the end of 24 hours, the new oil that would burn for the next 7 days would have had to be yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, and that can't be. Therefore, there must have been some oil left from the first day, because you have to have yesh me'yesh and not yesh me'ayin. So there was a little bit of oil left from the first day in order to create more oil for the subsequent days. If we follow the logic of the Taz through, then what does that mean? That on the first day you didn't have enough oil either, and it still burns for a full day. Which means there was a miracle even on the first day too. That is the approach of the Taz. That means on day one there was a miracle. What was the miracle? That the oil that should have burned for the whole first day did not burn for the whole first day. Rather, a little less oil was burnt, and that was the oil that was used for subsequent days. Very nice, but what has that got to do with us? Okay, if you have a look, Vafilu Davar Muat, Azu Yizbarach Noisim Bracha, Laharba Sama'at Masha'en came but Davarekan in Shayach by Bracha La, so it's Birya Chadasha. Hashem does not make new creations. And therefore, what happens is that the oil on the first day was also miraculous. Chanukah can be 8 days long, and it's all well and good. Okay. Rav Kook, in an epic letter to his son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, and this was a letter written in 1917 when he was the Rav of Machzikei Hadas in London. As is known, he gets caught in Switzerland in the middle of the First World War. He's unable to get back to Eretz Yisrael. And London, we have the privilege of hosting him in London for those 2 years where he was very much active here in spreading the light of Yiddishkeit, but himself really struggling with the separation from his beloved Eretz Yisrael. So this is a letter that he wrote to his son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, who's back in Eretz Yisrael, on the 8th day of Chanukah, 1917. And he discusses this Taz. And he thinks this Taz is a little bit strange. Because, you could ask the fundamental question on it. It's all well and good, this rule of you need something in order to create a miracle. Elisha needs to have a bit of oil to keep it going and keep it going and keep it going because a bracha is an extension. But that's not true when Hashem's doing the miracle himself. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing the miracle, then what difference to him if it's something from something or something to nothing from nothing? Therefore, says Rav Kook the following thing. This rule of something needs something only happens when you have a Navi there. He's limited. At the end of the day, a Navi is a physical human being. He's limited in what he can do, and therefore there are spiritual rules in terms of the miracles that a Navi can do. They used to go to Navi school. The Bnei HaNaviim learned how to be Navi, learned how to do it. And part of the rules of Navi school is miracles only come from something that already exists. You can't create something from nothing. But Rav Kook says, if you have a nes that happens without the decree of a Navi, Hashem can do anything. He's not bound by any rules. That'll be ridiculous. So Rav Kook comes along and says, no. Why then was it? Why then was it that it had to happen this way? So he explains Pshat in the Taz that on the first day, some of the oil was left over in order that that oil should be left over for the subsequent days, is for the following reason. Ikra de milsahu, mipnei mitzvah shel shemen zayis, shim haya kol shemen kala, v'nischad shahabria, einza bichlal shemen zayis. What are you meant to light the menorah with? Shemen zayis zach, pure olive oil. Where does olive oil come from? Olives. Where do olives come from? Olive trees. If you are burning oil that was created ex nihilo, from nothing, that's not shemen zayis. That's not olive oil. That's shemen nes. That's miracle oil, available in all good superstores. Right? That's miracle oil. You can't light a menorah with miracle oil. You have to light a menorah with shemen zayis. Therefore, there has to be a little bit of shemen zayis left over from day one. Not because Hashem can't do the miracle any other way, but in order for the miracle to be done with olive oil, in order for the hadlaka to be done with shemen zayis and not shemen nes. And the proof of this is a sugi we're not going to go into now. It's a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos and Menachos about what happens with the korban ha'omer if you've got wheat that falls from the sky. Can you bring the omer from wheat that falls from the sky? And it's machlokes. Is it wheat that was on a ship and it got what's it called? It got blown up into the air and it starts falling from the sky because it just got kind of passed around the ecosystem, as it were. Or no, is it actually miraculous wheat? Right, it's based on that Gemara over there. Now, the point is, Ein Zeh Shemen Zayis, and therefore there had to be a little bit left over. Why is this significant? Because there's another Gemara, and everything's going to link in, hopefully. There's another Gemara, and it's quite an interesting one. It's a continuation in Bamim Madlikin, where we say those Mishnayos on Friday night. But the Gemara goes into more depth, obviously. Tani Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama taught. Psilos Shmanim. Sha'amr Chachamim Ein Madlikin Behem B'Shabbos. The types of wicks and oil that the rabbis said you can't burn on Shabbos because they don't burn too well. Ein Madlikin Behem B'Mikdash Mishim Shenem Alahalis Ner Tamid. So certain wicks and oils the rabbis don't let you use on Shabbos. They don't burn well, you might come to move them or whatever. Those wicks and oils you can't use in the Beis HaMikdash. And on that Gemara, Rabbi Akiva Eiger goes ballistic. What are you talking about? Wicks and oils. Last time I checked in the Torah, the only oil you can use in the menorah anyway is olive oil. Why is the Gemara coming along and telling me lots of different types of oils that you could potentially use in the menorah? What a load of nonsense. The only oil using the Beis HaMikdash is olive oil. Why on earth would the Gemara come to tell me that I can use other types of oil? The Torah already told me that I can't. So again, where are we up to? We had the famous kasha of the Beis Yosef. He says, why isn't Chanukah 7 days? We don't need the 8th day, that's the first day. The Taz says, because on the first day there was a miracle. What was the miracle? A bit of the oil was left over. Why? Because you can't have, because the next day needs to be created something from something, not something from nothing. Rav Kook said that wasn't the reason Hashem can do anything. Rather, it should be Shemen Zayis and not Shemen Nis. And now we've got this question of Rabbi Akiva Eiger on the Gemara saying, hey, 1 second. What on earth are you talking about? You can't have other oil. You can have other oils in the Beis HaMikdash. What a load of nonsense. It's only olive oil. So Rav Kook explains something so beautiful. He says like this. You may well be aware that when the Chashmonaim came into the Beis HaMikdash, it's not just that they couldn't find Shemen Zayis, Zach, Tahar, olive oil. They also couldn't find the menorah either. It disappeared. They'd nicked it, they'd stolen it, they'd melted it down, they'd taken it back to Greece, Syria, wherever. It wasn't there. So they come into a desecrated, defiled Beis HaMikdash. And then they find any oil, they don't find any menorah there either. No problem. What do? They get out their DIY kit and they start cobbling together a menorah. What? Miksha achas zahav kula? No. Not made out of one piece of gold. Oh, this is a very simple DIY B&Q IKEA menorah. Flat pack. Look at this. V'nira lanias daiti, says Rav Kook. Shekashem sha'amr b'menachas kafches tezav ein ma'akev b'menorah. A menorah actually doesn't need to be made out of gold altogether because it says gavim kaftorim u'prachim dashinon ba'zav ba'gavim kaftorim u'prachim. Eina ba'zav eina ba'gavim kaftorim u'prachim. That all the laws of having a menorah that has these flowers and these knobs and these cups. Just by the way, if you haven't ever learnt it, I would say that under reading Rav Hirsch in Parshas Truma, Mitzvah Hashem another year, if we have the opportunity, we'll go through it together maybe. But reading Rav Hirsch on Parshas Truma, where he explains the menorah, what the menorah is. And he explains every knob and every cup and every flower. significance, the dimensions, the measurements. I don't know how he knew this. It must have been Ruach HaKodesh or deep Kabbalah. But the Gemara says, all of these different things that you need, the knobs and the flowers and the decorations, that's only when your menorah is made out of gold. If your menorah is not made out of gold, you don't need any of that. You can just have literally 7 poles, round, straight, however you decide the menorah was. Same thing. So what have we got here? If your menorah is made out of gold, it has to have all these decorative knobs and cups. If it's not, then it can be simple. Same thing too with the oil. If you're using olive oil, then it has to be pure and kassus lama'ar, and it has to be the first squeezing. But if it isn't, it doesn't even need to be pure altogether. You could theoretically use other oil in the Beis Hamikdash. And if you did, it wouldn't need to be shemen, zach, katit lama'ar. So b'diavad, if you don't have, post facto, if you don't have olive oil, you could use other oil, just like the Gemara said. And that answers Rabbi Akiva Eger's kasha. Rabbi Akiva Eger's kasha, what are you talking about? You can only use olive oil. No. You can use other oil if you haven't got olive oil, and then it doesn't even need to be pure. It just needs to burn well, give a clear light. If you can give a clear light and burn well, it'll do. You realize suddenly the whole Chanukah story starts to unravel at this point. Forget the fact they could have used tomei or olive oil. They could have just got some, canola oil, cottonseed oil, whatever. Got a friend of mine, he was becoming frum and growing in his Yiddishkeit. He decides, I'm not doing any of these Chanukah candles anymore. Oh no, that's not frum enough for me. I'm lighting with oil. Unfortunately, his schoolboy error, never to be repeated, as he went to the kitchen cupboard, got out the sunflower oil, poured it into his newly bought menorah with his wicks, and let's just say his parents weren't so pleased that they were left with a massive bill to repaint and redecorate the entire living room when it was filled with plumes of black smoke. I shudder to think what was going on there. Right? So do not use sunflower oil or vegetable oil to burn your menorah. Bad move. Okay, but that being said, if you've got other oil, they could have got other oil to use. Then what's with the whole Chanukah story altogether? It's shocking. According to Rav Kook, who's learning the Gemara straight out, answering Rabbi Akiva Eger's question, we didn't even need olive oil in the first place. Halachically would have been just fine with different types of oil, as long as they'd have burnt well. Do you realize what's going on here then? Says Rav Kook, if so, the miracle of the oil was only for the sake of Hiddur mitzvah. It wasn't even for the sake of the mitzvah itself. Hiddur mitzvah, we want to do the mitzvah beautifully. You want to do the mitzvah beautifully? Light with pure olive oil. No problem. But it wasn't really necessary. Technically speaking, they could have got away with something a lot simpler and a lot easier. But the fees are nasa hanes b'yom harishon b'shvil Hiddur mitzvah. T'gamim haya kalek al hashemen v'haya nimtza mechadash b'nei skama. Afal gav de'ein hashemen zayis mekom hakom shemen hu. Oh, and by the way, on the other 7 days, let's say they had this one flask of olive oil, very nice, right? But for the subsequent 7 days, if it would have burnt with miracle oil, that would have been good enough b'diavad. Why did you have to have the miracle on day 1 of having a bit of oil left over? Was so that the olive oil should burn for 8 days. And it shouldn't be miracle oil. Miracle oil would have been b'diavad. Olive oil is lechatchila. Olive oil is Hiddur mitzvah. Miracle oil isn't. Now he says, well, 1 second. Yeah, it's okay. We can understand hashkafically why it would be that a nace would be done for Hiddur mitzvah. Right, there's a whole discussion why that would be. But 1 second. There's an obvious question here that Rav Kook now raises. If the whole point of the miracle of Chanukah is that the nace should be done with olive oil because of beautifying the mitzvah and Hiddur mitzvah, well, think for a second. What kind of menorah are they lighting in? They're lighting in a plain metal or wood menorah without any of the decorations. Kind of like the type you might see on a street corner, one of the Chabad ones, all the poles banged together. Something your kid might come home from kindergarten. I don't know. Simple, basic. 1 second. If it's all about Hiddur mitzvah and beautifying the mitzvah, why did the miracle only happen with the oil and not with the menorah? And that is Rav Kook's fundamental question. That's really what we're going to be dealing with. Why was the miracle only with the oil and not with the menorah? So look at this. Amnam. This is in the second piece on the second page. Yesod hanes de Chanukah nasa lehadia segulas ruach hakodesh asher b'Yisrael. There is a very important idea in Hasidus and in Kabbalah called Ar v'Keli, the light and the vessel that contains it. And that obviously will parallel to the lights of the menorah, the oil, and the menorah that holds it. Yesod hanes de Chanukah nasis lehadia segulas ruach hakodesh asher b'Yisrael. With Rav Kook, you have to read it in the Lashon HaKodesh because it just doesn't translate properly. His Hebrew is so poetic and so gorgeous. What is the essence of the Chanukah miracle? Is the spiritual identity of the Jewish people, which brings life to the material world and is not dependent on it. And there is no culture in the world and no spirit in the world that can compete with this. Al kochach aval tikun arotzi sha'ateichen achamri shu chavle la'ofi aruchani akli la'ofi aruchani. Yes, it's true that it's desirable that the spirit should lift the material and the material should be beautiful too, and that Hashem's light should fill the world in the most beautiful of ways. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. And there are times of actual poverty. There's times of anius chomris, nishara ha'uma, aval ba'asher ruchani. There are times where the Jewish people are physically battered. We are physically poor. We are materially bereft. Nonetheless, we are always spiritually rich, says Rav Kook. And therefore, the miracle of Chanukah is telling us that the essence of the Jewish people is never the thing that holds the light, but it's the light itself. It's never the kli, it's the or. And therefore, the miracle does not happen with the kli. The miracle does not happen with the menorah. The miracle happens with the oil. And they're happy with just using barzel mechupa be'etz, metal which was coated with wood or with wood itself, because that'll do, it's kosher b'di'evet. But when it comes to the oil, which is representative of the spirituality, hapnimius, hatach, the inner world, the oil, that's where the miracles happen, because that has to be pure. And therefore, there are two different hiddurim, there are two different levels of beauty over here. Hiddur shel tahara, which is kosher even if it's tumah. Even if the oil was tumah, they could have used it anyway, but they were mahader not to do it. And the hiddur of shemen zayis, of using olive oil. What is this referring to? This says taharat haruach b'Yisrael, v'lo yerida shel atumas avodah zarah of Israel. This is the spiritual essence of the Jewish people that can never be affected by anybody else. And if we take this idea, we can plug it into some pretty big concepts. The Maral in their Mitzvah says, what is the essence of Chanukah? The essence of Chanukah is the victory over the spiritual over the physical, the inner world over the outer world. What is Yavan? Yes, they want wisdom. Absolutely. And therefore they're obsessed with the Torah. And they want to destroy our relationship with it. Because they didn't want us to have that chachma. Because it's a higher chachma than theirs. Greek wisdom, that's human. Torah wisdom, that's divine. That's something the nations of the world don't have. Malcheh b'chsareh b'goyim ain't Torah. Torah b'goyim, no, ain't tamin. Chachma b'goyim, tamin. Sure. Torah b'goyim, we don't believe that. Not for a second. And therefore, this Malchus Yavan, it wasn't just they were anti-Semites. It's they were fundamentally opposed to the whole concept of Torah. That's why in Daniel, this Malchus Hashlishi is like a Nemer. Azka Nemer, bold like a leopard, that's them. That's, we're meant to be Azka Nemer. This is the idea of Chachma. There's a lot there. But ultimately, in Golus, there are two threats to the Jewish people. And in fact, there's a pasuk which the Rambam brings in the Igeret Teiman where he's giving chizuk to the Jews of Yemen who are faced with persecution. And brings a pasuk 4 lines up from the bottom from Yeshayahu, Perek Nun Daled, which if you've learned the Sefer Im Habanim Samecha, he starts off Teichtel, who's in Budapest in the middle of the war. Starts off with this pasuk. Kol kli yutzar alayich layitzlach. Any implement that is raised up against you will not succeed. And no tongue is going to work against you. Two threats the Jewish people get faced with. Either a kli or a lashon. Either they're coming at us with their guns and their bombs and their tanks and their nuclear bombs, or their katyushas, or their kassams, or their knives, whatever. That's a kli. That's when the Jewish people are physically threatened. But there's a time when we're threatened with the lashon, with the rhetoric, with the chachma, with the silky, smooth-spoken words. Two different, distinct types of threats the Jewish people are faced with. So says the Maharal, Malchus Yavan will stand up to the Jewish people because we represent Hashem's Torah in the world. Because they're representative of Chachma. Not divine wisdom, as we said, but human wisdom. And therefore, what are they obsessed with? The Beis HaMikdash. They desecrate the Beis HaMikdash. This wasn't just a war crime. Because the Beis HaMikdash has both of those elements to it. What do we say? The Beis HaMikdash is the source of that wisdom. That's why they're going to attack the Beis HaMikdash. Like that famous apocryphal story with Yirmiyahu Hanavi meeting Aristotle. Irrelevant about the plausibility of the story. The concept is true. Why are you crying over these Eitzim and Avanim? Why are you crying over these sticks and stones? You wouldn't understand. But all the wisdom that I ever learned is because of this place. Of the place where the physical and the spiritual fuse, where godliness is brought into the world. Or Aron Einam in Amida, the laws of physics don't even apply properly in the Beis HaMikdash because the spirituality is so intense. And this is what Yavon represents. It's there since the beginnings of time. Chazal already explain it, the beginning of Bereshis. Toyuva haaretz ha'isa soyhu is Bavel. Vavoihu is Galus Madai. V'chayshech is Galus Yavon. Darkness is Yavon. Shech a name shall Yisrael. They darken the eyes of the Jewish people. B'gzeros, saying with their gezeros, with their decrees, they say, Kisval Karen Hashar. Right on the horn of an ox, you have no portion in between the God of Israel. It's right there at the beginning of the Torah. Al Panei Tahim is Rome. And the end of it is Ruach Elokim Rachefes Al Panei Hamayim is the Ruach of Mashiach. Hold that thought for a second. Kisu Lachem Al Karen Hashar. Why are they writing on the horn of an ox? Different explanations. One was your ox back in the day. That was your main work. That's what you worked with. That was your combine harvester. That was the thing. That was the big workhorse, as it were. Your ox plowing up your field. So you had to write on it, "I don't believe in God." There are other people that say no, it was a child's drinking cup. That's what they used to give kids to sip with. We're giving kids a subtle message from the time they're very little. We don't believe in God. But there's something else as well. The symbolism is very rich. Who's the Shar? The Shar is Yosef. B'char Shara Hadala. Right on the horn of Yosef, the ox, we don't believe in God. What is Yosef? Yosef is the universal. He's the mashpir. He's the one that provides sustenance to the world. He goes down to Mitzrayim. He engages in Paro's court. He's there for the whole, saves the world, Yosef. Yosef is the universal. As opposed to Yehuda, who is the particular. He goes down to Goshen. Horos Koshna, it's just for the Jewish people. Obviously, there's Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. Right, loads there. But Kisulach and Makar Ashar is a reference to Yosef. Because they want us, cooperate with us, be like Joseph, assimilate, be part of our society, help us, improve our economy. It's not about your own distinct, unique cultural identity. Al-Karen Hashar. Don't be Judean, be Josephian. That's one point. But there's something else as well. I remember I felt this very strongly when I heard this sikha from Rav Greenberg and Karen B'Yavneh 20 years ago. Vayich Hashem v'yefet as a simla. Story at the end of Parshas Noach, where Noach has gone from being the tzaddik tamim b'dareisav, perfect man in his generation. He has this precipitous decline and becomes Vayachal Noach isha adam avitakar, he becomes an amoretz, becomes a man of the earth. And what happens? He gets drunk. And he's lying there, all exposed. So what happens? Shem v'yefet, vayichlu Shem v'yefet as a simla. Shem v'yefet, they take a cloak and they put it on their shoulders and they're going backwards that they shouldn't see, and they cover up their father. They don't see as far their father's disgrace. Says Rashi, vayikach is in the singular. It doesn't say vayikchu in the plural. And he took Shem v'yefet. Why? Shem Shem was the instigator. He went to do it. Yefet, he just followed. Sounds like a good thing, brother. So Shem, as a reward for taking the cloak, gets tzitzis. We get Shem's children, that's us. We get to wear a talis or tzitzis because Shem covered up Noach. He took the initiative. Yefet, he came in number 2. They get buried during the time of Gog and Magog. Not bad. What does that Rashi want? What do you want from that Rashi? What's the significance? And why is it relevant to us? And this is where it's really beautiful. It says like this. There are two drivers. This is Rav Greenberg, Rav Mordechai Greenberg's Shlita. It says, there are two drivers, there are two motivators for human conduct. Mania nimusi and mania musari. Sometimes we behave out of etiquette, and sometimes we behave out of ethics. Or he wants to call it aesthetics and ethics. Ethics tell us to be tov and yasha, even when we're by ourselves and there's no one else there to judge us or to. Doesn't matter. You're by yourself, so what? You're still meant to be an ethical, moral person. Oh, but if it's just etiquette, nimusiyut, well, that's just the way you behave with other people. If the way that you eat is just about having good manners when you're with other people, then you'll be a pig when you eat by yourselves. But no, if it's a din in nichbadus, and I'm a human being, I'm b'tzelem elokim, I'm a mensch. Yeah, I'm not going to eat like a behemoth just because there's no one there. Right? It's very different. It's totally different. If it's just about social contract theory and if it's just about the consent of people, then that changes from time to time. And that is the real difference between Shem and Yefes. Shem was the one that moved in he went straight away. He's the initiate. He understands this is the right thing to do. So he gets a tzitzis. Magen Avraham points out that actually there's lots of different opinions about how to wear your tzitzis. Right? Some people wear it over their clothes, all totally tucked in. Magen Avraham brings the Arizal that you're meant to wear the beged of the tzitzis underneath your shirt and have the tzitzis hanging out. What's the idea? That tzitzis is the idea of internal morality. I'm not doing things because people can see them. I'm doing them because I know that it's the right thing to do. Right? As opposed to Yefes sees what his brother's doing and he joins in as well. Because that's proper. That's what it's not because it's necessarily moral, but that's what my manners, that's what etiquette would require me to do. Also, then you get Kvura. Kvura is covered abrius. They got a reward for that. And Noach blesses them. Yafta the Yafet v'yishkam ba'alei Shem. Yes, it's Yafet, it's beautiful, but he has to dwell in Shem's tent. Kadosh Baruch Hu blesses Yafet with this feeling of beauty and nimusim and manners. But the Shechina is always going to be in the Ayhalei Shem. It's always going to be with the Jewish people. Because in order to create Hashras HaShechina, if you want to bring Hashem's presence into the world, it's not enough to look good, it's about being good. So living a godly life, not just looking the part. And Rav Amiel, who was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, following Rav Kook, says, don't think that it's as simple as that. It's not pshat that the Greeks had no ethics. Just like you'd say the Jewish people have no aesthetics or manners. That would be ridiculous to say it's a zero-sum game. They've got this and we've got that. That would be childish. Not at all. There are many books of ethics written by the great Greek philosophers. Just like aesthetics absolutely have a place in Yiddishkeit. Whether it's in Torah Shebichsav, the Torah Shebal Peh. What's the difference though? The Yavanim come to their ethics through their aesthetics. And we come to our aesthetics through our ethics. What's your driver? What's moving you? Is it about what's ultimately right? Or is it ultimately about what looks good? That's the fundamental difference between Tzion and Yavan. By the way, the difference between Tzion and Yavan is just the letter Tzaddik. Tzaddik, which is Yosef, which is Yesod, which is all of this, is the difference between Tzion and Yavan. And he brings lots of different examples of this. And he says something so powerful. As far as the Torah is concerned, something that is not ethical cannot be beautiful. Beauty itself is measured against the yardstick of its ethical right or wrong, its ethical greatness. And therefore, when we look at things that are right or wrong, we're not just looking at them in terms of true or false or good and bad. If something is moral and it's ethical, then it's beautiful. That's what beauty is. You can't have something which is spiritually repulsive and think that it's physically beautiful. It doesn't work together. If something which is moral and it is wonderful, that's what is beautiful for us. As opposed to this, when it comes to the Greek worldview, excuse me, then it's the other way around. The ethics are going to create something beautiful. But you could have, because why? Because it's all about social contract theory. Right? Ultimately, the goal is Seder v'mishtar b'medina. Everything's got to work right. Oh, if it's got to work right, we've got to have a system of ethics and morals. We want it to be beautiful, so we'll develop an ethical, man-made system. If this is all true, now we can come back to the Or and the Kli. We can come back to the Shemen and the Menorah and go back to the original question. Why was it that the nace was done with the oil and not with the menorah. But isn't that just exactly the point? Of course, the menorah is a mitzvah from Hashem, and it's there in the Beis Hamikdash, but it's the kli. It's the aesthetics. The R is the real thing. We're not celebrating the menorah on Chanukah. We're celebrating the light. Ner mitzvah v'Torah are. We're celebrating this idea of ethics and morals and musa and Torah, not the aesthetics and not the nimusim, and not the social contract and not the convention and not the manners, not the kli that holds it, the thing itself, the real deal. And therefore, yes, this whole nace was there for Hiddur mitzvah. But where was the Hiddur mitzvah? In the Shem and not the menorah. Because you can draw that distinction there too. It's in the Aron, it's not in the Kli. That's what we're celebrating on Chanukah. A nace that shows that the Shekhinah is there with us. It's a nace that's going to be there to light up the next 2,000 years of Galus. To tell us, yeah, there are going to be times when life is going to be incredibly tough. Yes, really everything should be wonderful and the menorah should be beautiful and the light should be clear. Rav Kook's saying there's going to be times where it ain't going to be like that. Where the menorah is going to be pretty shoddy. It can be wood. It's going to be metal. It'll be whatever you can get. But the light will always remain pure. And if the light will remain pure, then ultimately you'll be able to build from there into something gorgeous once again. But if the light is dull, if the light is contaminated, if our spirituality is in some way affected, then it's all over. Therefore, Chanukah is there from the beginnings of time, right there. With the sons of Noach, whatever it is, Chanukah is always there to light up the path from the beginning of creation to the Achras Hayamim, to the end of time. The idea is always going to be the same. It's all about the pure oil. That's Chanukah. And their mitzvah v'Torah are. Chanukah, the Chag of the Torah Shabbal Peh, of releasing the Or Hagonas into the world, the hidden Or. And now perhaps we understand that a little bit more, why it would be that the nace is done with the oil and not with the menorah. Have an amazing and delightful Chanukah.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.